He had not that it had been one of those nights that scraped the nerves raw. A storm swelling over the city like a wounded beast, thunder crawling down the narrow streets, lightning slicing the clouds into jagged veins of white. His phone was dead. His shoes, long past salvation, swallowed the rain and spat it back with every step. The streetlights flickered like they were afraid of the dark. He kept his head down, counting cracks in the pavement. When he saw the old man at the crossing, the city, he could already hear his mother's voice in his head. "You can't save everyone, sweetheart. You can barely save yourself." He almost believed her, until the old man shifted his weight, and the slick rubber tip of the cane slipped on the wet asphalt. The man, "Sir." It was at the curb. "Guess I didn't get the memo to stop caring." The man's lips curved in a faint smile. Lightning flashed behind him, and for a heartbeat the street was white. Eli, no old man, no cane, just the whisper of wind through the alley, and the sound of his own heartbeat. On the ground lay something small and metallic, a pendant shaped like a crescent wing, its surface etched with a pattern that pulsed faintly red when he touched it. Warm, despite the cold. He slipped it into his pocket, thinking maybe it was worth enough to pawn for a bus pass. He didn't notice that the rain had stopped. By the time he reached his apartment, the streets were slick mirrors of sodium light. His mother was asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked to her chin, the oxygen machine sighing softly beside her. He tiptoed past, set the bread on the counter, and pulled the pendant out under the kitchen lamp. It was heavier than it looked, made of some silvery metal that caught light and twisted it. When he tilted it, a faint shape appeared inside the curve, almost like an eye. That night, he dreamed of footsteps echoing on cobblestones, of a voice whispering from behind a curtain of rain, asking him why he stopped. He woke with the taste of iron on his tongue, and the pendant cold against his skin, though he was sure he'd left it by the window. The next day, strange things followed him. The lights in the store flickered when he passed. A customer stared too long, muttering something that sounded like marked. A black cat followed him for 6 blocks, eyes glowing faintly in the daylight. And that evening, as he locked the back door, he saw someone standing across the street. A tall figure in a dark coat, motionless beneath the street lamp. The air around him seemed thicker, the way heat wavers above asphalt, though the night was freezing. When a truck roared past, the figure was gone, leaving only the echo of a voice Eli thought he'd dreamed. "You have kindness still." By the time he reached the corner where he'd met the old man, the traffic light was dead, its red lens shattered. The puddles reflected nothing but black sky. Something tugged at his chest then, not pain, not fear, but recognition. The pendant beneath his shirt felt alive, pulsing once, in rhythm with his heart. He pressed his palm over it, whispering, "What are you?" The answer came as thunder rolled across the city, and every light for a mile flickered out. When they came back on, an old newspaper from a nearby bin had blown against his leg, soaked and clinging. The headline, half obscured by grime, caught his eye. "Vampire Lord of the East disappears. Council in turmoil." Eli stared at the date. The paper was 15 years old. He folded it slowly, his breath misting in the air. Somewhere in the dark, something laughed softly, an echo of gratitude or hunger. He couldn't tell which. At home, the pendant gleamed faintly beside his heart, and for the first time in his life, the shadows in the corner of his room seemed to be listening. The storm that had drowned the city the night before left everything washed and hollow, like a film set after the cameras were gone. The sky was an unpolished steel mirror, heavy with a light that didn't belong to morning or evening. Eli walked through it like someone who had misplaced the thread of his own life. The pendant burned faintly against his chest, hidden beneath his shirt, but he could feel the pulse of it echoing through his ribs. Every time he tried to take it off, the clasp refused to open, as if welded shut. He told himself it was just a trick of fatigue, a cheap alloy reacting to his skin. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a darker thought had begun to root itself, that it wasn't a pendant at all, but a promise. By late afternoon, the grocery store smelled of rain and spoiled fruit. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, stuttering like a failing heart. Eli stocked shelves and tried not to think about reflections, about voices that whispered in thunder. The old man's face lingered behind every blink, the impossible stillness of him, the way the air had seemed to tighten around that final smile. At the register, a woman glanced up at him and frowned. "You look pale," she said. He muttered something about bad sleep and forced a laugh. The sound didn't convince either of them. When he looked down, he saw her hand trembling as she passed him the money, and for an instant, her pupils thinned like slits. He blinked again, and they were normal, human, anxious. "You should stay home tonight," she whispered, and hurried away before he could ask why. After closing, the manager offered him a ride, but Eli refused. He wanted the walk. He needed the air, or maybe the silence between streetlights. The city was too quiet for a Friday night. Windows glowed faintly behind drawn curtains, and somewhere a siren wailed and faded. When he reached the alley that cut toward his building, he stopped. Someone was there, at the far end, half lost in shadow. A man watching him with an intensity that stilled his breath. He couldn't say how he knew, but it was the same presence from the crossing, aged and unaged, human and not. The man stepped forward into the weak glow of a flickering lamp. He wasn't the frail old stranger Eli remembered. His hair was dark and fell over a face too symmetrical to be kind. And his eyes, when they found Eli, burned a deep garnet red that didn't belong to any living thing. "You have something of mine," he said. The voice was the same, but stripped of gentleness, resonant and ancient like the echo of a cathedral bell. Eli's throat went dry. "You mean the pendant? You dropped it. I tried—" "It does not fall," the man interrupted, his tone flat, almost curious. "It is claimed, and it has chosen you." Eli stepped back, his shoes scraping against the wet pavement. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you can have it back. I didn't mean to take anything." He reached for the chain around his neck, but his fingers trembled, and the metal burned hotter, biting into his skin. The man's eyes flickered, catching the motion. "You can't remove it," he said quietly. "Not while I live." "That's crazy," Eli muttered. "You some kind of lunatic?" The man's expression didn't change, but the air around him thickened. The lamp behind him guttered and died, plunging the alley into half-light. "Not lunatic," he said. "Lord Kyle of the 13th House, once a king, now a ghost, wandering among those who forgot what we were." He took another step, and the space between them seemed to fold like a shadow bending. "And you, human boy, have my seal bound to your heart." Eli couldn't run. His body knew before his mind that running would mean dying. The man, Kyle, moved closer until his face was a whisper away. His breath was cold, the kind of cold that carried centuries. "Do you know what you did?" Kyle asked. "You helped me when I was dying." Eli tried to laugh, but the sound broke. "You? Dying? You're insane. You look like you eat bullets for breakfast." A faint smile touched the vampire's mouth. "Not bullets." "Time!" He lifted a hand, and Eli flinched, but the fingers only brushed the fabric over the pendant. The metal pulsed once in response, sending a shock through both of them. Kyle drew in a breath, the first true sign of emotion cracking his stillness. "It has bonded," he whispered. "I haven't felt that in 300 years. "What are you talking about?" Eli demanded. "Life debt," Kyle murmured. "When one of my kind is saved by a mortal's will, the law binds them until the debt is paid. You touched me when I was weak, bled for me when I had none left. Now our fates are entwined. I am bound to protect you, and you to carry my mark." "Sounds like a curse." "It is," Kyle said simply, "and a gift, if you survive it." He turned then, eyes lifting toward the mouth of the alley. A second later, Eli heard it too. The click of boots on wet pavement, multiple pairs, moving with precision. A flash of silver, then another, glinting under the lamplight. Cahill's expression hardened. "Hunters," he said. "They smell me. Stay behind me." Eli wanted to argue, but before he could, the air split open with the crack of gunfire. Bullets hissed like hornets. Kyle's hand swept through the air, and darkness poured from his fingers like ink dissolving in water. The shots vanished into it, muffled. "Run," he said. And when Eli hesitated, Kyle's form dissolved into mist and reformed beside him, one arm seizing his wrist. The world turned inside out. An instant of cold wind and blind speed. And suddenly they were no longer in the alley, but beneath stone arches dripping with condensation. The scent of earth and candle wax filled Eli's lungs. They stood in what looked like an ancient tunnel carved from black rock, the walls lined with faded symbols. Kyle released him, and the motion echoed faintly, as though the world itself were hollow. "Where are we?" Eli whispered. "Beneath your city," Kyle said. "The old catacombs. We built them long before your kind forgot we existed." He leaned against the wall, breathing shallowly. The glow in his eyes dimmed for the first time, and Eli realized he wasn't unhurt. A dark stain spread beneath his sleeve where the bullets had grazed him. The blood shimmered like molten rubies before fading into the fabric. "They've grown bold," Kyle muttered. "Once, they would not have dared." Eli found himself kneeling beside him without thinking, pressing the edge of his torn sleeve against the wound. "You're bleeding." Kyle looked at him, startled. "You would touch me again? After seeing what I am?" "You're still bleeding," Eli said stubbornly. "That makes you real enough." For a long moment, Kyle said nothing. Then, very quietly, "You should have run. Kindness kills faster than blades in my world." "Maybe," Eli said, "but it's the only thing that ever saves anyone in mine." A sound like distant thunder rippled through the tunnels. Kyle straightened, his silhouette regaining that impossible stillness. "The seal binds stronger now," he said. "You've drawn their attention. They'll come for you as well as me." "Why me? I didn't ask for this." "No one ever does," Kyle murmured. "Fate doesn't ask permission. It collects debt." He stepped into the gloom, where torches flared to life of their own accord, painting his face in moving gold. "Stay close, Eli. The world above will no longer see you as human. You carry my mark, and every creature that smells it will know what that means." Eli followed, heart hammering, his reflection stretching long across the wet stones. Somewhere behind him, the city went on pretending to sleep. But in the darkness beneath, an ancient vow had been rewritten by a single act of mercy. And as they walked deeper into the labyrinth, Eli realized he wasn't afraid anymore. He was angry, curious, alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. He had stopped for a dying man because it was the right thing to do. Now he walked beside something that shouldn't exist, and part of him wanted to see just how far kindness could go before it became something else entirely. The tunnels seemed endless, carved from stone older than language, their air heavy with the scent of iron and ancient prayers. Eli followed Lord Kale through the dim corridors, the torchlight sliding over carvings that looked like veins running through the earth itself. Every step echoed with a sound that wasn't just their own footsteps, but something deeper, the heartbeat of a city that had forgotten what it was built upon. The pendant on Eli's chest pulsed in rhythm with those echoes, as though the stone and the boy were learning to breathe together. Kale moved with a predatory grace that made no sound, but even in his stillness there was fatigue, a shadow under the immortal mask. He looked less like a myth and more like something caught between forms, bound to flesh, but remembering light. They reached an open chamber where water dripped from a fractured ceiling into a pool that glowed faintly red. Kyle stopped beside it, resting one hand on the slick stone. His reflection trembled on the water, a dark blur that refused to solidify. This place was built to remember what my kind once swore to protect, he said quietly, before we became what we are now. Eli stayed near the wall, wary, watching the way Kale's hand trembled for half a heartbeat before he withdrew it. The wound on his arm had healed, but he still looked like a man dragging ghosts through his veins. "You mean vampires had rules?" Eli asked, his voice rough in the silence. Kale turned his gaze on him, and for a moment the red in his eyes softened to something more human. "We were not born monsters. We made ourselves that way. Once, we served something greater, but eternity corrodes even purpose." Eli sat on a broken stone step, the cold seeping through his jeans. "So now what? You said this, whatever this is, binds us. What does that mean for me?" Kale studied him for a long moment. "It means you are under my protection until the debt between us is balanced. But protection cuts both ways. You are a beacon now, a spark in the dark, and every creature that still remembers my name will smell it on you." Eli let out a low, humorless laugh. "Lucky me." Kyle tilted his head slightly, almost curious. You ask, you may feel it in dreams or pain or other ways." The last words hung uncertainly, as though even Kyle wasn't sure what he meant. Eli rose and stepped beside him, staring into the red pool. "So this thing in me, it's like a connection?" Kyle nodded. "A tether. If you die, the magic collapses and I follow. If I perish, the mark devours you. Until balance is restored, we live or end together." Eli's throat tightened. "That's not protection. That's prison." Kale's mouth curved slightly. "To mortals, perhaps. To immortals, it's the only honest form of companionship." The torch sputtered, throwing shadows that crawled across the ceiling like living veins. Kyle's eyes glowed brighter for a moment, catching something distant. "They've found us," he said, voice suddenly sharp. Before Eli could ask who, a tremor rolled through the stone under their feet, followed by a sound like wings beating far above. Kale grabbed his wrist, dragging him through a side passage just as part of the ceiling collapsed where they had stood. Dust rained around them. "Hunters again?" Eli gasped. "No," Kyle said grimly. "Not hunters." "Mine." Her eyes glowed the same red as Kyle's, but where his seemed weary, hers burned with hunger. "Mavara," Kyle said, and the name sounded like both memory and curse. "You should have stayed dead." She smiled. "And you should have stayed a king. But here you are, skulking with prey. Tell me, is this your new taste? Mortals and pity?" Her gaze shifted to Eli, assessing, amused. "He smells of your blood." Kyle moved between them instantly. "Leave the count." The sound. Kale fought with precision, each motion ancient and deliberate. But he was weaker, his strength divided by the bond. "Run!" he shouted, but Eli couldn't move. Something inside him burned. The pendant, alive again, pulsing with each heartbeat. He saw the blood that spilled wasn't ordinary red. It shimmered faintly silver, laced with the light of the pendant. Mavara recoiled as it touched her, hissing like acid. Kyle, "You shouldn't have done that," he said, kneeling beside him. "You would have died." "You would have too," Eli murmured through clenched teeth. Kyle tore a strip from his own coat and bound the wound, the gesture oddly gentle. The silver light beneath the blood pulsed through the fabric. "Your blood carries my strength now," he said. "You're changing, even if you don't feel it yet." Eli looked up at him, pale, shaking. "Am I turning into one of you?" Kyle met his gaze. "No, you're becoming something neither of us understands." They stayed there in the half-darkness, listening to the slow drip of water. Kyle finally sat back against the wall, exhaustion visible in the set of his shoulders. "I disappeared to end the cycle. The night you found me, I had taken mortal form, preparing to sleep for a century. You interrupted my escape from eternity." Eli managed a faint smile. "Guess I ruined your retirement." Kyle almost smiled back. Perhaps Kyle looked toward the tunnel where Mavara had vanished. "Now we survive long enough to decide what we become. The Council will not forgive this, but they fear what they do not understand. And you, boy, are a very dangerous mystery." They rose and began walking deeper into the catacombs. The air grew colder, filled with the faint hum of unseen energy. "You said I'm a beacon," Eli said. "If they're coming, they'll find me no matter where I go." "Then we use that," Kyle replied. "We let them follow the light and see what truth burns them first." For a moment, Eli caught a glimpse of something like admiration in Kale's expression, the faintest echo of the old king beneath the centuries of ice. The path ahead twisted into darkness, and as the torchlight faded, the glow of the pendant guided them onward, a fragile star between human and immortal. Behind them, in the chamber they had left, the pool of red water began to ripple on its own, glowing brighter where Eli's blood had fallen, as though the earth itself was waking to listen. Somewhere far above, the first bells of midnight rang through the city, marking the hour that divided the living from the damned. And deep below, two figures walked together, one born of flesh and compassion, the other of shadow and remorse, bound by a bond neither heaven nor hell could yet name. The world beneath that gray weight, the city slept without dreams, and far below its sleeping heart, two beings carved their path through darkness that no century had ever fully tamed. Kale led, silent but restless, his every movement measured by a kind of cold desperation that Eli was only beginning to understand. When Kyle stopped, Eli felt the pull in his chest before the vampire even spoke. Their connection was no longer a myth, but a shared heartbeat. They emerged at last into a place that didn't feel like the tunnels at all. The air changed, thin but clean, threaded with the scent of pine and ancient stone. Moonlight leaked through a fissure in the ceiling, silvering a forgotten chamber shaped like a chapel. Its walls were covered in murals too faded to understand, figures half erased by time. Angels, perhaps, or something older, their faces worn into anonymity. Kyle paused at the threshold and breathed as if tasting memory. "This was our sanctuary once," he said, "before we were hunted, before eternity became a disease we couldn't cure. I built this place to remember the difference between hunger and worship." Eli looked around, tracing his fingers across a cracked column. "Feels more like a grave now." Kyle's mouth twitched in something between amusement and grief. It is mine. He walked to the altar at the center and drew a line across the dust with one long finger. When he spoke again, his tone was almost human. The seal that binds us can be shielded here, but only if the mortal half allows it. The choice must be yours. Eli frowned. You mean you can hide me? Not hide, Kyle said softly. Protect. Ward the bond until I settle the court's fury. There are still those who remember what I was before exile. If I can remind them that compassion isn't weakness, they may stay their blades long enough to listen. He looked up, the faintest shimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. You would be safe here, at least for a while. Eli shook his head. Safe doesn't mean alive. You're walking straight into people who want you dead. Better me than you, Kyle said. They will see a mortal wearing my mark as an abomination. They'll tear you apart to cleanse their pride. Then I'll fight, Eli said, his voice trembling with something that was neither fear nor defiance, but a strange clarity. If this bond works both ways, then it's not just yours to protect. It's mine. Let me be one on purpose. The silence that followed stretched thin as glass. Finally, Kyle turned away. You sound like someone I once knew, he murmured. A queen who believed that light could forgive the dark. He touched the stone of the altar, and faint red symbols flared under his palm. Her faith burned her alive. Do not repeat her mistake. Maybe she wasn't wrong, Eli said quietly. Maybe she was just early. Kyle's laughter came then, quiet and bitter, but real. You speak as though you have centuries behind your eyes, boy. You forget. You still bleed. So do you, Eli replied. The vampire looked down at his own hands, and for the first time since the alley, Eli saw uncertainty. Yes, Kyle said finally. I still bleed. Above ground, the first tremor of movement rippled through the higher chambers of the catacombs. Word had reached the Vampire Council. Kyle had returned, tainted by human mercy. The nobles gathered in the ruins of an old cathedral converted into their hall, their voices echoing like the hiss of wind through broken glass. Mavara stood among them, her wounds already healed, her fury tempered into venomous grace. He means to defy the law, she told them. He hides in the old crypts with his mortal pet. If we do nothing, he'll infect us with his disease of sentiment. Lord Varen, ancient and skeletal, leaned forward in his throne of black marble. Then flush him out, he said. Let the hunters reclaim what the bloodline lost. If the mortal dies, it will remind our king what he traded for weakness. Around them, murmurs of approval rippled like cold water. The decision was made long before sunrise. The court would move against its lost lord before his compassion could spread like contagion. Eli felt the shift before Kale did. The sudden heaviness in the air, the faint vibration through the stone. They're coming, he whispered. Kale's gaze snapped toward the ceiling, and the torches flared blue. Too soon, he hissed. I needed more time. He reached for Eli's wrist, but the pendant between them pulsed violently, sending a shock through both. Kyle staggered. The bond burned like a live wire. They've locked onto the seal, he said. They're tracing me through you. Then cut it, Eli said. Break the connection. Kyle shook his head. To break it, one of us must die. The seal is balance, not chain. You would take me with you. The ground above cracked. Dust rained from the fissure. Kyle dragged Eli toward the altar, pressing his hands to the old carvings. Listen to me. This ward will hold for a few hours at most. When I leave, do not move from this place. Do not open the doors for any voice but mine. You're leaving? Eli demanded. I can't let you fight them alone. Kale's voice rose. The the calm stripped away. You think I do this for myself? I have spilled enough blood to flood this city twice. If they reach you, they'll end the only proof that mercy still exists in our cursed veins. Stay here. That's not a request. The air thickened with his power, a pressure that made Eli's ears ring. The vampire's eyes glowed brighter than the torches, red shading to gold. Swear it, he said. Swear you'll stay alive, no matter what you hear. Eli nodded, breathless. Kyle stepped back, shadows unfurling around him like a cloak. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then he was gone, leaving behind only the whisper of displaced air and the faint echo of his voice. Kindness isn't weakness. Remember that. The silence afterward felt alive. Eli sank to his knees beside the altar, hands shaking. The pendant cooled against his skin, dimming but still beating softly. He thought of his mother sleeping under oxygen hiss, of the old man in the rain, of the choice that had brought him here. The chamber seemed to pulse with unseen movement. From the walls, faint murmurs rose, almost like singing, the language of the carvings awakening. He didn't understand the words, but he felt their intent. Protection woven from faith, older than Kyle's own immortality. The sound wrapped around him like warmth, and despite the fear clawing at his chest, he felt a strange calm. He closed his eyes and whispered into the dark, "Come back alive, you stubborn ancient bastard." Far above, Kale emerged into a world sharpened by moonlight and betrayal. The city's spires pierced the mist like broken teeth, and on the highest ledge of the old cathedral, figures waited. His council, his former kin. Mavra stepped forward, her sword catching the light of a lightning flash. "The prodigal king returns," she said, her voice cutting the night. Kale stood against the storm, cloak whipping around him like wings. "The kingdom was yours to keep," he said. "All I wanted was peace." "Peace?" Mavara laughed. "With humans? With food?" The others hissed in agreement. Kyle's gaze swept across them, and something ancient stirred behind it. "You call them food. I call them mirror. Look into them long enough, and you'll remember what you lost." The first blade struck the stone beside his feet. "Then you'll die remembering," Mavara whispered. Kyle's eyes flared red. "Then I'll die awake." Below, in the sanctuary, Eli felt the echo of that declaration ripple through the bond, like thunder underwater. He pressed his hand over the pendant and whispered his own vow. "Then so will I." The night split apart. Thunder rolled across the hollow bones of the city, as though the storm had been waiting for this moment, to bear witness to the return of violence sanctified by eternity. Kale stood on the cathedral's edge like a dark flame, his cloak billowing, his eyes reflecting lightning. The council spread before him in a semicircle of obsidian and silk, their pale faces gleaming like moonlit masks. They were beautiful in the way ice was beautiful, flawless, lethal, and without mercy. Below them, the old stone square was filled with echoes of their soldiers, cloaked and silent, waiting for the command to fall. Mavara moved first, her lips curling in something that was not a smile. "You could have ruled forever," she said softly. "You could have forgotten the weakness that made you human once. But instead, you chose to drag a mortal into our blood. Tell me, my lord, what does it taste like to rot from compassion?" Kyle looked at her, and though his voice was calm, it carried centuries of buried grief. "It tastes like forgiveness, Mavara, something you could never stomach." The rain started again, sharp needles on stone, washing streaks of silver down his armor. The others shifted, uneasy. He could feel the weight of their eyes, the hesitation that came not from loyalty but from fear. He had once been their king, their judge, their executioner. Now he was a relic, an idea they wanted to erase before it reminded them that eternity had rules they had broken long ago. The first strike came without sound. Mavara's blade sliced through the air in a gleam of silver fire, cutting through the rain toward his throat. Kyle caught it barehanded. Blood bloomed across his palm, black against the lightning. "Still predictable," he said, twisting her wrist until the blade sang free and fell to the ground. "Still cruel." Her eyes burned. "Still bound," she hissed. And with that word, the soldiers moved. They came from every shadow, a dozen, then 50, their fangs glinting, their movements blurring. Kyle met them not with rage, but with precision. His form dissolved into shadow and reformed behind them, each motion a whisper of death. The air became a storm of motion and light, their weapons clashing, the rain turning to mist as it hit the heat of their conflict. He was faster, older, but the bond had weakened him. He felt it with every strike that landed too close, with every pulse that stuttered in his chest. The pendant's light flickered faintly beneath the ground, where Eli waited, his hand pressed over his heart, feeling every wound as though it were his own. In the chapel, the ward around the altar began to hum. The carvings glowed brighter, responding to the pain that bled through the tether. Eli gasped, his back arching as the image of the battle burned behind his eyes, the clash of swords, the taste of rain mixed with blood. The pendant pulsed like a heartbeat, trying to break through his ribs. He could feel Kyle weakening, could feel the cold that wasn't his own creeping into his hands. "Stop," he whispered into the dark. "Please." The carvings on the wall shifted, turning their faceless figures toward him. The ward wasn't just a shield. It was alive. And it was waiting for command. Eli's breath trembled. "Protect him," he whispered. "Whatever." Above, Kale stumbled as the energy burst through the cathedral stones, rising around him like a halo of blood and light. The council froze. The rain fell upward for an instant, defying gravity, drawn toward the pulse that now surrounded the ancient king. Mavara recoiled, recognition flickering in her eyes. "What have you done?" she screamed. "What power answers you now?" Kyle looked down at his blood-stained hand, feeling the warmth that wasn't his. "Not mine," he said. "His." The glow surged outward, knocking back the nearest soldiers, as though the air itself had turned solid. The city, the bomb he saw, and then came the voice, deep and echoing through the marrow of his bones. "Do you offer what remains of your life for his?" It was neither male nor female, not sound, but the vibration of the universe folding inward. Eli's vision swam. He thought of his mother, of the night he'd found the dying man, of the way Kyle had looked when he first smiled. "Yes," he said. "Take whatever you need. Just don't let him die." The pendant exploded in light, shattering the ward sigils like glass. A pain, it was faint, a gray glow on the horizon, but it burned the eyes of his enemies like fire. "Impossible!" one of them hissed, retreating into shadow. "The sun cannot touch this world." "It can," Kegel said, rising slowly, the light burning in his chest. "When someone dares to care for it." He spread his arms, and the glow around him grew until it swallowed the entire rooftop. The soldiers screamed as the light touched them, their forms unraveling into mist. Mavara shielded her eyes, stumbling back. "You think this makes you a savior?" she cried. "You've doomed us all. Kyle hit the ground first, his strength waning, his limbs heavy with borrowed humanity. Mavara rose, half her face burned where the dawnlight had touched her. She moved with desperation, her beauty now fractured. "You can't win," she hissed. "You can't protect him forever." Kale's answer was a whisper. "Then I'll die trying." They collided once more, this time without elegance, only raw will. The chamber around them groaned as the light from the bond poured upward again, drawn to the surface like a tide. Mavara's blade cut deep into Kale's side, and he staggered. The same wound bloomed on Eli's body far below, crimson staining his shirt. He collapsed beside the altar, choking on a cry that wasn't his. The pendant pulsed one final time, then shattered, scattering shards of red crystal across the floor. In the same instant, Kyle caught Mavara's blade in both hands and drove it back toward her heart. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words were sincere. "For everything." The blade pierced her chest, and the scream that followed was both fury and release. She disintegrated into ash, her final breath dissolving into rain. Kyle fell beside her, his vision narrowing, the dawn spilling through the broken roof. The wound in his side refused to close. He looked toward the horizon, knowing what he would see. The first true sunrise his kind had witnessed in 500 years. Its light brushed his face, not burning, only warming. "So this is how it feels," he murmured, and closed his eyes. Eli woke to silence. The glow was gone, the ward extinguished, but he felt the emptiness immediately. The bond had gone slack. "No," he whispered. He pushed himself up, despite the pain tearing through his side, and stumbled toward the fissure that led upward. The passage twisted, half collapsed, but the light leaking through was enough to guide him. When he reached the surface, the world had changed. The storm had broken completely, and the sky was pale gold. The cathedral was a ruin, its roof gone, its stones cracked open like the shell of some ancient creature finally freed. And in the center of it all lay Kyle, unmoving, his cloak spread around him like wings. Eli fell to his knees beside him. "Don't do this," he said, voice breaking. "You're supposed to be the immortal one." There was no answer. The only sound was the slow drip of water from the broken arches. Eli touched Kyle's shoulder, and the vampire's skin was cool, not with death, but with something gentler. The blood on his side still shimmered faintly, and Eli realized that some of it was his own. Their wounds had merged completely. What kept one alive now depended on the other's will to remain. "You said mercy was strength," Eli whispered. "Then, fight." He pressed his hand over the wound, ignoring the heat that seared his palm, and felt his heartbeat slow until it matched the one buried deep in Kale's chest. The air shimmered. The dawn brightened. Something ancient in the ruins stirred, recognizing the rhythm. And then Kyle drew a breath. It was shallow at first, then deeper, until his chest rose and fell in time with Eli's. His eyes opened, not red, but silver, reflecting the sky. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said hoarsely. "You shouldn't have stayed," Eli answered. Kyle looked at him for a long moment, then laughed quietly, the sound rough but alive. "We're both terrible at obedience." The ruins trembled again, not from battle, but from change. The light of dawn didn't fade. It settled, weaving through the cracks of stone like veins of gold. The sky above them cleared, revealing not the merciless blue of day, but a softer hue that felt almost human. Kyle sat up slowly, staring at his hands. The sunlight touched them, and they didn't burn. His expression was one of disbelief and awe. "It shouldn't be possible," he said. "Maybe it wasn't," Eli replied. "Until now." From the distant streets, bells began to ring. People were emerging, human and vampire alike, drawn by the sight of light spilling through the cursed clouds. Some fell to their knees, others simply watched, their faces turned upward. Kyle rose unsteadily, the wind lifting his torn cloak. "They'll come for me again," he said softly. "The ones who can't bear to see the sun." "Then let them," Eli said. "This time they'll have to face it in daylight." Kyle looked at him, and something unspoken passed between them, a promise, perhaps, or a vow. Whatever curse had bound them no longer felt like punishment, but like choice. The first rays of sunlight touched the stones around their feet, turning them to gold. The darkness that had ruled their world retreated, not destroyed, but tempered. As the city below awoke to its first true morning in centuries, Kale turned to Eli, his voice barely audible. "You gave me back the dawn." Eli shook his head, smiling through exhaustion. "You just needed someone to remind you where it was." They stood in the ruins, neither fully human nor fully immortal, but something forged between the two, a bridge that neither heaven nor hell could tear apart. Around them, the bells kept ringing, and for the first time since the night of his exile, the king of vampires felt what it meant to be alive. The city had not yet learned what morning meant. For generations, it had lived beneath the veil of false night, its rhythm bound to the pulse of shadows. Now, with the clouds torn apart and the sun bleeding softly through, everything shuddered under the weight of awakening. The light was fragile, as if unsure it was allowed to exist. It touched rooftops like a secret, and spilled into the cathedral ruins, where Kyle and Eli stood, two broken figures against the shivering world. The dawn should have destroyed him. Instead, it wrapped around him like forgiveness, soaking into the cold marble and the ash of the fallen council. For a long time, they said nothing. The air hummed, thick with the scent of ozone and stone newly burned clean. The rain had stopped, but the echo of thunder lingered, as though the storm were still watching from beyond the horizon. Kale's wounds glimmered faintly where the light reached them, closing slowly as the warmth entered. Eli knelt beside him, exhausted and shaking, his shirt torn and stained with their mingled blood. He could feel the same healing rising under his skin, his heartbeat no longer his own, but matched to another rhythm that carried centuries of silence within it. When Kyle finally spoke, his voice was quieter than the wind. "Do you feel that?" he asked. Eli lifted his head, eyes squinting against the brightness. "The light?" "No," Kyle said. "The world remembering itself. It wasn't peace yet. Not truly. The dawn was too new, too strange, and the shadows hadn't retreated far enough. Across the city, creatures stirred in panic. Vampires who had slept through ages felt their bones ache, their blood thicken with something that felt dangerously close to mortality. They had forgotten the sun's touch, forgotten that light could be anything but punishment. Now it poured through their sanctuaries, through shattered glass and half-buried tombs, waking everything they had buried to avoid feeling. The air filled with cries, not screams of agony, but the keening of remembrance. The balance had shifted. The old law that divided night from day, the dead from the living, had cracked. And in the breach stood Coil, his silhouette bleeding gold through black. He rose slowly, testing the limits of his body. The cloak that had once seemed woven from night itself now shimmered faintly, its edges flickering with the same color as the dawn. "They'll come for me," he said. "The others who still believe in the curse. They'll call this betrayal." Eli steadied him with a hand. "Then let them see what mercy looks like when it fights back." Kyle turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the spires of the vampire citadel rose from the mist like blackened spears. "The citadel was built to contain the first fire," he said. The day we learn to hide from heaven. If the dawn has returned, the fire will awaken too. They'll try to reclaim it. His voice grew heavier. If they do, everything we've done will burn away. The sun will fall back into the sea, and the world will drown in shadow again. Eli swallowed. Then we stop them. Kyle looked at him, something fierce and fragile in his expression. You're still a boy with mortal blood and dreams. You shouldn't have to carry the end of the world. Eli smiled faintly. You're still a man who thinks redemption is supposed to be painless. The vampire laughed, a sound that felt new, almost human. Very well, he said. Then we'll finish this together. They left the ruins as the bells continued to ring. People emerged from their houses, pale, blinking, uncertain whether they were awake or witnessing a miracle. The light touched them gently, and where it met fear, it softened. Where it met faith, it brightened. Some fell to their knees. Others wept. Eli felt their awe as a weight pressing against his ribs. Kale walked among them like a figure out of myth. The once terrifying king of night, now lit from within by the very thing that had always promised to destroy him. None dared speak to him, but all watched. Word spread quickly. The dawn had returned, and it followed a man with eyes of silver. By the time they reached the citadel gates, a crowd had gathered behind them. Not soldiers, not rebels, but witnesses. The air shimmered with the heat of new faith. Kale looked back once and saw faces lifted not in fear, but in hope, and that simple sight steadied him more than any weapon could. The citadel loomed ahead, vast and cruelly beautiful. Its towers twisted upward like spears designed to pierce the heavens themselves. As they stepped inside, the air changed, colder, older, filled with the breath of those who had ruled unseen for centuries. The grand hall stretched endlessly, its floor polished black to mirror the ceiling. And at its heart, where once Kale's throne had stood, the surviving members of the council waited. They looked smaller now, less divine, as though the light had stolen some illusion from them. Lord Varen's eyes gleamed with fury. You bring daylight into our sanctum, he hissed. You blaspheme against the covenant that gave us eternity. Kyle stepped forward, his boots echoing softly. Eternity without compassion is rot. You've called it power, but all it's ever been is fear. Varen rose from his seat, the movement slow but immense. And you, our greatest king, would throw it away for what? A human child who doesn't even understand the curse you've tangled him in. Kale's hand closed briefly into a fist, then relaxed. He understands more than you ever did. He remembers what it means to save someone instead of consuming them. The council stirred, voices like hissing serpents filling the air. You broke the oldest law, one of them said. You mingled blood with prey. No, Kale replied, his tone measured. I shared life with someone who knew its worth. The words carried, echoing through the hall. Eli stood behind him, feeling the vibration of each syllable through the bond. He could feel Kyle's heart beating faster, not from fear, but from a rising storm of resolve. You cannot unmake what has already begun, Cowell said. The dawn is proof. The curse is breaking because mercy finally outweighed hunger. Varen's eyes burned. Then we'll weigh it with blood again. He lifted his hand, and from the shadows around the hall came the remnants of the vampire guard, their armor gleaming, their movements perfectly synchronized. Kyle didn't move. The light from the broken roof above filtered down like dust, touching him and the boy beside him. Do you see this light, Varen? Kyle said. It doesn't ask who is worthy. It simply falls. It shines on the damned and the devout alike. That is its law. That was always the law. The first guard struck, a blur of black steel. Kyle met him halfway, the impact ringing like a bell through the marble. The battle spread instantly. The guards moved like waves, but the light bent with Kale's motions, each strike turning luminous, every movement both destruction and creation. Eli tried to stay clear, but the bond pulled him in. Every wound Kyle took echoed in his body, and every heartbeat Eli gave steadied Kale's faltering rhythm. The floor cracked beneath their feet, the hall itself rejecting the weight of centuries of sin. One by one, the guards fell. Not burned, not shattered, but dissolving into dust that rose toward the ceiling, drawn into the pale sun above. The council recoiled, their power unraveling. Varen hissed and lunged forward, faster than sight. His blade found Kyle's chest, piercing deep, and Kyle's body jerked as the light around him faltered. Eli cried out, feeling the same wound tear open his side. He stumbled toward them, his vision tunneling. "No," Kale rasped, catching Varen's wrist. "Not again." With his free hand, he reached for Eli, their fingers brushing, the bond igniting one final time. "It was never about saving me," he whispered. "It was about saving them." The light erupted. It wasn't fire, not in the human sense. It was revelation, a flood of truth too pure for shadow to endure. The citadel's roof vanished, the sky breaking fully open above them. The sun poured through, and every vampire who had clung to darkness for power felt the warmth spread through their veins, not killing them, but transforming the endless hunger into something else. Remembrance, sorrow, release. They dropped their weapons and fell to their knees as Kyle's body dissolved into the light, his last words echoing through the hall. "The night is not your prison. It was your refuge. Step out of it." Then he was gone. Eli fell to the floor, the wound in his side closing as quickly as it had opened. The silence afterward was absolute. The sun filled the hall completely, bathing even the darkest corners. The council was gone, their thrones empty. In the center of the light, where Kyle had stood, lay the faint outline of his cloak, smoldering softly like a shadow burned into existence. Eli reached for it, but it crumbled to dust, rising toward the open sky. He felt the bond release inside him, not with pain, but with peace, a heartbeat fading into eternity. Outside, the bells rang again, not in mourning, but in celebration. The world had turned, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the day did not belong to fear. Eli walked out of the citadel as the dawn spread across the city, and everywhere he looked, he saw people lifting their faces to the light, eyes wide with wonder, no longer hiding from the sky. The air was alive with the scent of rain and renewal. Above him, the sun climbed higher, and in its glow, he thought he saw a figure in the clouds, watching, smiling, eyes the color of silver and dawn. The day unfolded slowly, uncertain of itself, as if the world needed to learn again how to breathe in light. The city that had lived so long beneath the veil of endless dusk now shimmered in the fragile brightness of morning. The mist that had clung to its towers for centuries was dissolving, revealing the true color of its stones and the long-forgotten murals that time had buried beneath soot. People emerged cautiously from doorways and alleys, blinking against the sunlight, their faces pale from generations of shadow. Some wept openly, their tears shining like jewels in the new light, while others simply stood in silence, unable to comprehend that the curse had lifted. The air itself seemed to hum with a pulse that was not entirely mortal. Bells rang from every spire, and each sound rolled through the streets like a heartbeat shared by the city itself. In the heart of that awakening stood Eli, barefoot and blood-stained, his hair plastered to his forehead, the remnants of Kyle's cloak draped over his shoulders. It felt impossibly light now, no longer the fabric of night, but a veil of warmth that smelled faintly of rain and iron. He walked slowly through the square where Kyle had fallen, his steps measured, reverent. Around him, the broken stones of the cathedral glowed faintly, where sunlight met the blood that had been spilled there. Nothing burned anymore. Nothing recoiled. The light accepted everything, even the ruins, even the memories of violence. Eli paused at the center, looking up at the sky that had finally turned blue. It was an impossible color, too vast, too alive. He felt small beneath it, but not afraid. Somewhere inside him, the echo of Kyle's heartbeat lingered, faint but steady, a reminder that immortality was not absence of death, but endurance of meaning. He pressed a hand to his chest and whispered, "You did it." The words vanished into the wind, but the wind seemed to answer, brushing softly through his hair like a sigh. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. Time lost its edges. The city began to change in ways no one could have predicted. The vampires who survived did not vanish with the dawn. They adapted. The light no longer destroyed them, though it weakened what they had once called hunger. They became pale wanderers of the morning, their eyes no longer red but gray, their voices softer. Some chose to live among humans again, helping to rebuild what centuries of secrecy had eroded. Others left the city, heading toward distant lands where the sun had never been seen, carrying the promise of a new balance with them. The old council's thrones were left empty, their stone seats overgrown with wild ivy that sprouted as if the earth itself were eager to reclaim what power had abandoned. Eli worked beside both kinds of people, never asking for thanks, never claiming the story as his. He slept little, dreamed often, and sometimes woke with the faint taste of silver on his tongue. One evening, when the horizon burned gold and crimson, Eli found himself standing at the edge of the rebuilt cathedral. It was no longer a fortress, but a sanctuary, its open roof letting the sunlight pour through unbroken. Inside, candles burned, not to fight darkness, but to honor memory. He knelt at the altar where Cale had first invoked the old ward. Someone had carved a new inscription into the stone, its letters rough but legible. Mercy is the bond between worlds. Beneath the words lay the half of the pendant that had once held the seal of Cale's power. It no longer glowed. Its light had joined the sun. Eli reached out and touched it gently, the metal warm from the day. "I kept my promise," he murmured. "I stayed alive." The silence that followed felt full, not empty. A soft breeze stirred the candles, and for an instant, he thought he saw a figure standing beside him. Tall, cloaked in light, eyes like polished silver. The image flickered and faded, but the warmth remained. At night, the stars returned to the sky, brighter than before, unhidden by the endless clouds. People gathered on rooftops to watch them, whispering names they had forgotten, tracing constellations that had vanished from their myths. Children were born beneath open windows, their first breaths taken under both moon and sun. The city no longer belonged to one realm or the other. It existed in the fragile peace between them. Eli walked its streets, no longer the frightened boy who had stopped for an old man in the rain, but something quieter, stronger. Some said he carried a shadow that never quite left him, others that he spoke sometimes in a language no one understood. He never confirmed either rumor. He simply lived, helping where he could, leaving traces of silver light wherever his hands touched. Years later, on a morning much like that first dawn, Eli climbed the bell tower that overlooked the entire city. The air smelled of spring and wet stone. From that height, he could see sunlight stretching across the rooftops, spilling into the river that once ran black with ash. The sound of life below was like music: voices, laughter, the hum of markets, the rhythm of feet. He closed his eyes and listened. Somewhere beneath the noise, faint but unbroken, he heard another sound. The echo of Cale's voice, not as command or ghost, but as memory turned into heartbeat. The night is not your prison. It was your refuge. Eli smiled. Then the dawn is our home, he said softly. When the bells began to ring, he did not move to stop them. Their chimes spread across the valley, announcing nothing and everything: that the world had changed, that compassion had undone fear, that one act of mercy on a rain-soaked street had rewritten the fate of light itself. The wind rose, carrying the scent of wildflowers through the city, and the sky deepened into a color neither day nor night could claim. In that space between, Eli stood alone but not lonely. His eyes lifted toward the horizon, where sun and moon shared the same sky, and for the first time in all remembered history, both burned gently. Two halves of the same promise kept.